Commerce. I would like to begin by acknowledging how very lucky we are to live, work, and play on the unceded territory of the Quanis and Katzie First Nations. I'm Taryn Stevenson. Hi, guys. I'm pleased to be your moderator for this panel. Just so you guys have some frame of reference, I have the tea shop on 2/24th. And if you're anything like us, you've tried to pivot your business during the pandemic, but you've seen a decline in revenue and you want to restart safely. So like you, we've been glued to the daily press briefings and we've read the general rules for reopening in British Columbia. But when I had specific questions, I was kind of struggling with who to turn to. So that's why we've engaged our panelists to answer your specific questions. I'm pleased to introduce, jumping ahead. Before we begin, you'll notice that you have all been muted. This is to keep the conversation flowing and to try and answer as many pre-submitted questions as possible. So there is a chat bar if you do have additional questions, and I will try and get to them, but we do have a lot to cover. And I would like you to also be mindful that this forum will not tolerate any discrimination or any harassment in this space. I would like to introduce the Honourable Lisa Bear, MLA, Maple Ridge Pitt Meadows, who I will invite to say a few words. Lisa?
Thank you so much, Taryn. Bob Deeth, MLA for Maple Ridge and Mission, and I would like to welcome everyone to this Zoom chat today. It's a really great opportunity to connect with everyone and help answer your questions. We too would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Katzie and the Kwantlen First Nation, and I want to give a very big thanks to my fellow panelists for making the time available today to make sure that we're able to answer all the questions that the community has to the best of our ability. So thank you, Taryn, and Bob and I welcome all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so on our panel, we also have the Honourable Bob Deeth, MLA for Maple Ridge and Mission, His Worship Mayor of Maple Ridge, Mike Morden, Chris Back, so he's the Director of OHS Consultation and Education Services for WorkSafe BC, Sarah O'Connor, so she does public health for Fraser Health Maple Ridge, and Brenna Aliff, Community Health Specialist from Fraser Health Maple Ridge. We have Chad Cowles, who's a Bylaw Compliance Officer for the City of Maple Ridge, Wendy Dupley, who is the Director of Economic Development for the City of Maple Ridge, Enika Bokhurst from the Downtown Maple Ridge BIA, and of course Flory from the Chamber of Commerce, who is graciously hosting this Zoom on their channel. So let's get going, you guys. First question, this one is over to Chris from WorkSafe BC. I'm hearing from a few employees that they're feeling uncomfortable to come back to work. If an employee is to contract COVID-19 while on shift in my business, am I liable as the employer, and am I covered by WorkSafe BC?
So great question, Taryn. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on as well. I'm very happy to be here. So essentially that falls under our claims process, and the claims process related to COVID is no different than the claims process for any other injury or illness that could occur within the workplace. I think the difference here is that because COVID can also be contracted within the public space, that there would have to be that proof that it did occur within the workplace. So if a worker is at work and they contract COVID-19, then essentially, I mean, they would need to report that to their employer. They are entitled to compensation if the following conditions exist. So there would have to be evidence that the worker has contracted COVID, so there has to be a medical diagnosis in a medical report, or non-medical factual evidence that it would establish the existence of COVID within the workplace. And then the nature of the worker's employment would have to be shown to have created a risk of contracting the disease significantly greater than the ordinary exposure risk of the public at large. So and that would be adjudicated by our claims team as any other claim that would come forward to us. If those conditions do exist, then yes, there would be compensation provided to that worker through the workers' compensation system.
Great, thank you. And a follow-up to that, to MLA Lisa Bear. We were also submitted this question a few times actually. So I'm trying to re-engage my part-time staff and start scheduling them for a few shifts. I'm hearing from a few employees that they're making more money on CERB and other benefits, so they're not necessarily motivated to come back to work right away. What is the obligation of the employer if the previous staff member replies, I don't want to come back to work for less than what I'm entitled to over here? And so what is that process, and what does that look like in regards to the responsibility of the employer? Lisa, are you there?
Yes, sorry.
That's
Thank
okay.
you, Karen. Employers absolutely need to work with WorkSafe BC on their return to work and opening plans. It is the employer's obligation to make sure they're providing a safe workspace for their staff. And it's important that in re-engaging with staff that discussion is had, and a discussion on what the main concerns of the employees are. Employment standards is the employer's resource for understanding any of the rights and responsibilities of you and your employee. So I would encourage, if you have any difficulties or difficult questions in bringing back staff, or the inability to bring back your staff who may be choosing to stay home otherwise, that you connect with the Employment Standards Office, and you can have that conversation directly with them so that you're assured of your rights as an employer.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have received a number of questions regarding masks. So these are the questions. We're going to direct this one to Fraser Health. To start with, should businesses make face masks mandatory before entering any local retail store, and for staff and for customers? So I'll throw that one to Fraser Health.
Sure, thank you, Taryn. Yeah, great question. As you can see from the BC CDC or Center of Disease Control website, it does have a section on masks, and it does say on there that wearing a non-medical mask in the community has not proven to be effective in preventing COVID for the person that's wearing it. And any mask does have a limited filtration, how efficient it is at filtration of the virus, depending on the seal, and if or not any other preventative measures are taken and used in place. So the most important thing is, again, the frequent hand washing, the physical distancing, not touching the face. And so customers really shouldn't be required to wear a mask or screened for their temperature or symptoms upon entry for ethical reasons. However, certainly they can be encouraged, especially when those physical distancing measures or other barriers, such as like a plexiglass screen, can't be installed in place. But the physical distancing and those other engineering controls, such as plexiglass, should be the first and foremost measure, in addition to those the frequent hand washing and sanitization stations.
That's great, thank you. And I do have a follow-up question for WorkSafe BC. This question is, am I required to provide PPE like masks and gloves for my staff?
Thanks, Taryn. So no, that's not related to COVID. That is not necessarily a requirement under our regulation. It does depend on the industry. There are some industries where that is a requirement. Healthcare would be one of them. But no, for the majority of employers that are out there related to COVID, it is not mandatory. It is not a requirement. In fact, WorkSafe BC does not have the authority to enforce any of the guidelines or orders or recommendations that are coming down from the Provincial Health Office. If an employer, I guess our expectation from that perspective is that an employer is putting a plan in place, and that that plan does consider where the risks are apparent for the transmission of COVID within the workplace, and that there are control measures put in place. Some of what Brenna mentioned there would go along those lines, but no, it would not be a requirement except in certain industries.
Okay, great. And then can we talk about social distancing? So do all stores and retail locations and businesses need social distancing floor signs? And how do you determine which businesses need that? Let's maybe hear from Fraser Health on that one.
Sure. So in terms of the social distancing, again, I would add and probably turn it back a little bit to WorkSafe in terms of the industry-specific guidelines. But certainly when we look at the provincial health officer's recommendations around social distancing, they have been one of the primary preventative measures that have been put in place. And businesses should certainly follow the recommendations of the provincial health officer where possible. And so this means just maintaining that 2-meter distance between one another. So consider the density within the business. If you know that you're just going to have one person coming in at a time, it's probably a lot easier than if you have more than a few people coming in. And so in terms of those signs, it really is going to be based on the business. So it's up to the business owners to identify how they can best facilitate that physical distancing. And if they feel that they have an area where customers might congregate, such as a lineup up to a till, then those signs on the floors that indicate the 2-meter marking might be suggested as a good measure to install, just to ensure that that physical distancing can be maintained.
Great, thank you. Sorry, you were saying that you may ask for some supplemental information from WorkSafe. WorkSafe, do you have anything else to add to that?
You know, that was an excellent answer. I don't know that I've got a lot to add to it. I would say, you know, from WorkSafe BC's perspective, of course, our mandate is worker safety. Now, there's a lot of crossover here in terms of worker safety and public safety, and a lot of the guidelines that we're bringing forward for industries will apply to both. So in a lot of cases, those floor signs are not necessarily something that would be specific to worker safety. Having said that, though, by maintaining the public being 2 meters apart from each other within the workspace, then it does allow that to occur for the workers as well. So, you know, we are really trying to get employers to focus on the plan and consider a number of different control measures that they can put in place, not just 1 or 2, but really looking at all the tasks and all the different things that they can focus on related to the physical distancing, hand hygiene, cleaning and disinfecting, and then having policies in place if people are showing any signs and symptoms of illness, and using what we call the hierarchy of controls, which focuses on elimination and substitution or engineering controls at the top, followed by administrative controls and then personal protective equipment. And those controls at the higher end of the hierarchy are much more effective than those at the lower end of the hierarchy. And interestingly, people sort of automatically want to go to the PPE, the personal protective equipment, the gloves and the masks, but they are the least effective in terms of the control measures. We want employers to be thinking about you know, the plexiglass barriers, the engineering controls, the actual physical changes to the workplace, the flow of the work, the flow of people within the workplace, and then having those policies in place, again, around cleaning and social distancing or physical distancing. So, yeah.
Incredible. Okay, so you just gave me the most amazing segue, because we have received a number of questions about plexiglass in specific. So can Chris, I'll keep having this conversation with you. Can you tell me which businesses will need plexiglass protection, and are there any alternative solutions that are more affordable but still effective? Also, we were submitted this other question about, could cashiers wear portable face shields instead of standing behind that engineering barrier like plexiglass?
So there's a lot in that question. I could probably spend an hour talking about this, but let's start with your first bit there related to plexiglass. So again, I want to come back to something I said a little bit earlier. There's no requirements from our perspective, from WorkSafe BC's perspective, on implementing a specific control measure. So we are not going to go out to an employer and write an order because they didn't put a plexiglass barrier in place. Our expectation, and where it falls under our regulation, is that an employer has a responsibility under Section 21 of our Act to ensure that they are protecting the workers from the risks of injury or illness in their workplace. So it is the expectation as we come out is that an employer has put a plan in place, that they have done a risk assessment, they understand the risks, and they have control measures in place. We won't tell an employer they have to have a plexiglass barrier put up. There could be other controls that they have decided to use as that will be just as effective or possibly more effective than a plexiglass barrier. I think why from our perspective, I think why people are going to plexiglass barriers, and it really depends on the workplace, it depends on the task that's occurring, but why I think the plexiglass barrier comes up a lot is because it is a physical barrier between two people. So again, a cashier at a grocery store and the customer that's going through there, and you can see through it and you can communicate through it without too much difficulty. And it's easy to clean. It's easy to wipe down. It's easy to clean and disinfect. You could get into other materials that create a barrier between yourself and other people. But if you're expecting that visible communication between the two people, then other barriers may not be as effective. So it really depends on the task that is at hand and what you're trying to accomplish in doing that. And with that response, I've already forgotten the second half of your question, so you'll need to remind me.
No. So the last half of that would be, could cashiers wear portable face shields instead of businesses? Say I'm a cashier at a grocery store. Can my employer give me a portable face shield instead of installing plexiglass?
Well, yeah, again, thanks for reminding me of that, Taryn. So again, I come back to the hierarchy of controls that I talked about earlier, and a face shield is a form of personal protective equipment, or PPE, and that is actually the lowest form of control measures when it comes to risks of injury and illness. Whereas when you look at the plexiglass barriers, that is an engineering control. It is a physical barrier, and that would be considered a higher level of effectiveness. Even administrative controls like the policies around physical distancing, that is a higher control measure than personal protective equipment. So our recommendation is that employers are again looking at a multitude of control measures, and our suggestion is that PPE, or personal protective equipment, which would include face masks, is not enough. We do want employers to consider what engineering controls or administrative controls can be put in place as well. So the answer is, it's not as effective as the plexiglass barrier, but it doesn't mean that an employer couldn't go down that route if a plexiglass barrier is not a viable option in that particular situation.
Okay, great. And so this question is going to be directed to Mayor Mike Morden. Do you think that there would be a benefit for the city to order protective equipment, say sanitizer, gloves, masks, in bulk for businesses to access at a bulk discounted price? So I'll give you an example. We personally just purchased 2 pieces of plexi, so for barriers for our shop from a local supplier, and that cost me $450. However, the price the price decreases based on how many pieces in each order. Is that something that the city is considering?
So the city of Maple Ridge is not permitted to procure for this kind of a purpose, actually, by the Act. We're not able to do that. What we talked about this, and what we think is the best course actually is to be a part of the facilitation process. So for instance, there's a lot of requirements for X, Y, or Z in PPP under certain standards, and there are professional bodies that determine what is appropriate within that type of a business or that type of a health environment or that type of scenario. So for us to get involved in that's for regulatory specialists as well as procurement specialists. So I think there's a role for us to facilitate it, but I think that probably the vehicle would probably be through maybe our local chamber and BIA together. And I think the fact that we're having this discussion here is great, and that we're here all to facilitate better ends. And how do we get through a lot of barriers to ensure that, given some very new turf here, this difficult landscape to operate, WCB suddenly in a moment's notice are required to be the regulators of all of this social distancing, a whole new area, I'm sure, for Mr. Back and the team over at WCB, and all of these other pieces of regulations we got to work with. So for us, we want to make sure that there's trust and confidence in our business community that they can be able to facilitate people coming to their businesses, that they've provided proper preventative measures to ensure that the social distancing is in place. And of course, there's always the wonderful Google reviews that will very quickly tell you whether or not this is a great business to come and visit because they've taken all these extra steps. So I really recommend that. But you know what, there's a lot of takeaways that come out of here and a lot of questions that are not going to be answered. So I want to make sure that, Taryn, if you can ensure that there's a vehicle there for our business community, as well as all of the resources you see in front of you today, have a way to access information in the future. We've been facilitating a lot of that in the city on our website, and we want to make sure that the business community has a way to get problems solved, to be able to overcome these barriers, to ensure that they are able to become viable as quickly as possible, but meet all the regulatory standards. And so I think that's a great thing that you've done, you know, for everybody here in this room to be able to facilitate this very, very fast track back into, we want our business to be open and viable, but we also want to make sure that everybody's safe and healthy, and health, of course, is a number one priority for everybody. So how do we get that done? So, you know, for us as the city, we want to hear about those challenges. We want to also make sure that we're facilitating opportunities for everyone to get back to work as soon as possible.
Great, thank you. And so this question was specifically directed to our Department of Economic Development for the City of Maple Ridge. So Wendy, I'm going to throw this to you, but I think that Mike just sort of answered that question. Are there any grants or subsidies available to small businesses to assist with the additional costs of providing safety in their location? So any additional expenses that they're having to incur?
Thanks for the question. I appreciate it. No, for sure, there isn't anything that's come out specifically that businesses can use for these sort of renovations or making safe all the different things they might have to do to their property. However, there is the federal government loan that is available that offers, you know, $40,000, of which, if it's paid back before the end of the year, it will actually be forgiven by $10,000. So it is an interest-free loan that is available, and I think that could be an option. Businesses might be able to tap into that to see them through until they get back on their feet and start generating that really positive revenue stream. So that's the one that immediately came to mind.
Great, thank you, Wendy. And finally, to Bob Deeth, MLA, I would love to know your thoughts on this. And also, do you know if there's an accessible supply chain provincially for businesses to access? Bob, are you there?
Unmute yourself, Bob.
Yeah, I did the same as Lisa. There we go. Yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for participating, and thanks for the question. And before I start, I did want to say that I really appreciate what everybody individually and all the businesses have done during the crisis. It's been quite amazing within our community, all the way from Mission, Maple Ridge, and Pitt Meadows, to see how people have acted. And one of the things that I noticed from talking to businesses recently is that the primary concern is the safety of their customers and the safety of their staff. Even though businesses are going through very difficult times, I just wanted to commend everyone on the call for having such a responsible attitude about this. And in many respects, a lot of the questions are about over safety, you know, about trying to make sure that we provide the best and most safe options for our customers and for our community. So thank you for that. And as far as the cost, of course, the provincial government understands that safety plans are going to involve other costs to businesses, implementing physical distance measures and providing PPE for staff, personal protective equipment. And these concerns are certainly being discussed at planning tables. The Premier does have a business task force that he's very active on. And but at this point, there's no current dedicated funding for workplace adjustments. But as I think Wendy mentioned, there's a number of federal and provincial financial supports. For example, the loans that Wendy mentioned about the Canada Emergency Business Loan, and that could become a potential grant if it's paid back. Business Credit Availability Program, the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund, and others. So there's a summary of those if everybody is on the call at covid.smallbusinessbc.ca. I'd encourage everyone, actually, that website is excellent, an excellent resource. And so I would encourage everyone to go there for supports. And we also mentioned, Chris mentioned from WorkSafe BC, that they've been working with employers and workers with education materials and consultation and workplace inspections to help the restart. And there's an information line at 1-888-621-7233. So I think that's really important. And keep in mind, there has been feedback that many of the recommendations are general, and each sector, each business sector is working on their own sort of unique things that they need to implement. So that's very important for people to know. So basically, employers, they need to review the health and safety guidelines, as you know, and best practices that are available at WorkSafeBC.com. And then what the provincial government is asking is to adapt these materials to the appropriate workplace. And of course, as I said, each sector is working on those as we go. And so that's about it for me for now. But you know, obviously, if you want more information, you can go to gov.bc.ca/restartbc and get a lot more information. And of course, Minister Bear, Lisa Bear, and our offices are open to everyone if you have questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I have a two-part question that was submitted specifically for bylaws in Maple Ridge. So the first part of the question is, how much COVID-19 signage do I need? So Bonnie Henry said that businesses are responsible to post their safety precautions in a public place. Am I allowed to have signage like a sandwich board with my social distancing measures on it for customers to read before they enter my business? So I'll throw that first part over to bylaws.
Thank you very much, Taryn. I'm happy to be a part of this panel. So I'll handle the two questions separately. Firstly, we do not suggest a prescribed number of signs. Signage simply needs to be in clear view for customers as they enter, so they understand the changes to how they are supposed to move or behave in the business. While we support provincial health orders and recommendations, bylaw officers are taking a common sense approach to the placement of signage and all the other orders and recommendations for that matter. Relating to sandwich boards, yes, COVID-19 related procedures on sandwich boards are allowed in front of businesses as long as they do not obstruct sidewalks in a way that blocks passage by pedestrians, wheelchairs, or other mobility devices. Business owners should pick common sense locations that can be seen by incoming customers. And so we're just treating COVID related signage in this way. Any other advertising signage continues to be regulated by the sign bylaw. But in this case, we're helping you help your customers get the knowledge they need to behave appropriately in your business.
Great, thank you. And the second part of that question is, if I have a high traffic location, can I put spacing markings on the sidewalk in front of my business, or will I need a permit for that?
So the answer to that one is also yes. For those businesses who need to control capacity inside their establishment by creating lineups outside, sidewalk markings are permitted and required, really. Beyond being spaced out by 2 meters, there's no standard style for markings. We've seen that colored tape, duct tape seems to work just fine. We simply ask that they do not create a situation where sidewalks look untidy, unsightly, or create a tripping hazard if they start to peel away.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're going to get into a bit more specifics. So this question is directed to both WorkSafe BC and Fraser Health. So this was a question that was submitted. How should I manage my fitting rooms in my shop? Is it safe for people to try clothing on? And do the non-purchased clothes need to be quarantined for 24 hours? So let's hear maybe from Fraser Health first.
Glad this is also going over to WorkSafe, as they may have some more industry-specific guidelines. I'd also like to highlight some of the material that's on the BC CDC website again, which really focuses again on that physical distancing. So again, trying to look at ways to maintain the distancing within the change rooms. So having only one person in a room at a time. And at this point in time, there's no guidelines that are really saying that clothing needs to be quarantined. The virus is known to be, it's airborne. And so something that comes through liquid it's not known to be airborne, sorry. It comes through liquid droplets. So when you cough and sneeze, and so in actually getting it transmitted onto clothing, somebody would have to cough on it, or the clothing would have to have been touched upon something that a surface that is like a high risk area that may have been also had somebody cough or sneeze on the area. So it's unlikely that it's going to be on the clothing. And so at this point in time, just again, focusing on that physical distancing and maintaining the appropriate sanitization of the areas, particularly any of the doorknobs, say for example, of the change rooms, frequent cleaning, sanitization, have maybe hand sanitizers there, and keeping the fitting room so that there's good flow throughout the traffic.
Thank you. And so WorkSafe BC, do you guys have anything else to add to that?
No, once again, Brenna did a wonderful job. I don't really have anything to add to that. That's exactly what we're recommending as well. So nothing to add.
Okay, so this is sort of in the
Sorry,
same.
it's Lisa Bear. I just wanted to add something in there that Bob had mentioned earlier. So in the coming days, imminently, in fact, the overarching provincial guidelines will be released, and that's going to be in the next couple of days. And those will be, those standard questions that everyone's asking: door handles, elevators, the big overarching provincial pieces. And then, as Bob said, sector by sector specific guidelines are going to be rolling out over the coming days. And so the retail sector will have guidelines. The personal services, spas, barbers, all of those will have guidelines. And so the answers that are being given today, which are amazing by everyone, there will be very clear guidelines given over this next week to actual sectors on what they need to do and how they need to operate safely. And then those guidelines, the provincial and then the sector guidelines, need to be taken in by each business and adapted in a way that makes sense for them and their business to keep their employees and their customers safe. And so we're going to be able to answer a bunch of questions here, but a lot more specific of the answers, like clothing quarantine, for example, like hairdressing and masks, as I see coming through, on some of the chat pieces. The government best practices will be out there. The clear guidelines will be out there, and the businesses will just need to adapt them to their own personal business. So I just want the community, the business community, to know those supports are coming. We know a retail sector plan is coming. We know a food and beverage, restaurant and hospitality one is coming. A tourism one is coming that I'm working on. These pieces are all being built as we speak, and they're coming in the next days. And so people will have a lot more of their really specific questions answered in those pieces.
Great. For now, we are going to continue to try to best answer these questions. So further to that, we do have a thrift shop and a vintage store who have reached out asking how they should process previously loved items. So very similar question: do they have a responsibility to the community to wash or quarantine items, or is it better to have signage that basically puts the onus and responsibility on the buyer to beware? Maybe I'll have Fraser Health speak to that one.
Sure. Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you, Lisa, for highlighting that, because that's exactly what I would say in this instance is Fraser Health certainly is adhering to the provincial guidelines, and the details of that phase 2 restart plan will be released within the coming weeks. And so they will have more specifics for the retail sector as well as many other sectors. And so just as the previous answer, again, looking at within the thrift stores, maintain that physical distancing, have the hand sanitizers, and at this point in time, there's no guidelines saying that quarantine is necessary. However, the industry-specific guidelines will be coming out. And so I would just say for those within the retail sector, look for those industry-specific guidelines that will be coming out shortly.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so a lot of questions about the issue of washrooms. So we've received quite a few questions about this. Very basic. What do I do about washrooms? Do I need an attendant to disinfect them after every use? And what if my location only has like one restroom versus a large bank of stalls? Maybe I'll throw to you, Fraser Health. I'll throw to you, Brenna.
Sure, definitely. So owners should definitely just make sure that those bathrooms are well stocked. So the soap is well stocked. There's appropriate facilities in terms of cleaning. So make sure that there's soap. Even consider having a hand sanitizer at the entrance of the bathroom. So you could put something that dispenses hand sanitizer as people come into the bathroom before they touch that doorknob. And also in terms of the doorknobs, just recommending disinfecting the highly touched surfaces, those doorknobs, the taps in the bathroom sinks, any light switches, any grab bars, any handrails. So making sure that those are being disinfected at least twice a day, but it is going to depend on the business itself. So some businesses may have hundreds of people coming through, and others may only have one or two people coming through. So work with WorkSafe BC again on those industry-specific questions, but just consider the sanitization and cleaning a minimum of 2 times a day. But then again, if you have more traffic through, just consider the traffic that is going through those highly used areas such as bathrooms and cleaning those highly touched surfaces.
Great. Okay, perfect. Okay, and then over to Mayor Mike Morden. I have a 2-part question for you. So we are seeing that the City of Maple Ridge has installed a hand wash station in Memorial Peace Park. I think that's brilliant. I'm wondering, will the city be installing additional hand wash stations? And also, would they consider placing public washroom facilities or opening up public washroom facilities in the downtown core? And who do you think would be responsible for sanitizing and maintaining those?
Okay, so thanks for the question, Taryn. I'm going to let Chad pick up part of that because he's already facilitated a wash station and it's in Memorial Peace Park right now. And I think it's important to know how that's working out because there's challenges when we do these things at considerable expense. There is no plan at this time to put any public bathrooms in. I do believe that there is some in the works in parks. Infrastructure coming, but they just aren't available today, and we're in an immediate situation here. So the public need to assume that we're not going to supply any public bathrooms. And I pass the rest of that question to Chad, if that's okay with you, Taryn.
Absolutely.
Because there's the piece on wash stations and where they all are, and they're pretty expensive to purchase, and we have 3 of them, and he'll let you know how that's all working out.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor and Taryn. So the initial deployment was seen as a little bit of a pilot project to assess whether the station would be respected in the location, and keeping it stocked with paper has been somewhat of a challenge, but nevertheless, it has proven successful in the location at Memorial Peace Park. So now as we sort of proceed through different phases of reopening and the public reassuming certain spaces, we'll assess the need to deploy the others as well. They're sort of on loan from our special events department, and in working with our emergency operations center, we will look at other locations for deployment in the downtown core in the near future.
Awesome. Okay. So over to Fraser Health for this next question. Obviously, sanitation, you have mentioned it a few times, which is key. So how often do I need to clean my counters, high touch point areas like my debit machines? What product is most effective and where do I buy this?
Sure. So again, just going back to the points that I mentioned in terms of those high touch surfaces, at least 2 times a day, unless there's say staff changeovers, and you want to make sure that you're washing in between those staff changeovers, making sure that you're providing providing employees with plenty of hand sanitizer and opportunities to go to the bathroom to wash their hands. In terms of the detergents, any of, so with cleaning, any of those liquid sort of detergents or cleaning, regular household cleaning supplies are fine in their undiluted form. So I can put in the chat box, BCCDC actually has a really good document on cleaning and disinfecting in public settings, and I'll put the link in the chat box. And this just, again, reiterates any of those common household disinfectants or ready-to-use disinfecting wipes or pre-made solutions are appropriate.
Great, thank you. That's awesome. Okay, another question for Mayor Mike Morden. So this was submitted. I want to reduce touch points by propping my door open so shoppers don't have to touch the door handle to open it. Will Maple Ridge have enhanced security and foot patrol? And now further to that, and I know I'm springing this on you and I'm sorry, but I've literally received a number of questions about it in like the last 24 hours. Businesses have noticed an increase of drug use, vandalism, and garbage in town. Literally within the last 24 hours, I've received 5 messages about it. So just wondering if there's a plan to increase security and in the area.
Okay, so first, Mr. Cowles is sitting in front of you. Actually, is our manager of more than just a bylaws officer. So he's the manager of our community social safety plan. And if anyone wants to go look at that, you can Google up the LEAD program in Maple Ridge.
Awesome.
So, in COVID times here, we've had to basically put this program into a faster measure of overdrive to deal with various aspects of this. So he's a community safety officer. He's the manager of those. There are 2 additional officers that you may have seen in the downtown core. And we've now, under COVID, we've given the launch order for 2 more. So it's in order to provide proper coverage, but these are not law enforcement officers. These are officers to intervene and be able to assist people into making better decisions as well as keep the public safe. And so this is not about a punishment, but this is about ensuring that we have safe passage for people into businesses, that they're able to stay healthy and safe, and also to be able to ensure that bad behavior is moderated and checked, and if necessary, that additional steps are taken. So we're really happy with this group, and we basically mobilized it in a more significant way in consultation with the RCMP as to what's appropriate for them to do and what's appropriate for Chad's group to do. So, but again, the city can't be in the provision of security for businesses. I've been in that business now for nearly 40 years. I'm happy to provide free advice to anybody, with no cost. Chad's group will as well, so will the RCMP. We're all into making sure that your businesses will remain safe. But it is your responsibility to take those steps. If you leave your door open, nobody's going to be able to prevent somebody from grabbing something and going. It's a simple fact of life. Smash and grabs happen when businesses are closed. If you leave your door open, that's going to happen, even in greater likelihood. And yes, we are fully cognizant of the fact that we have an influx of people from the downtown east side right now. It is not lost on us. And that's part of the reason why we've mobilized further response. And, we're working with the province right now to take further steps in order to try and assist people into treatment and into housing. And these are many, many steps that we're taking under this plan. And, I'm comfortable that Lisa and Bob and myself, as well as Chad and the Salvation Army and many others, are working together to try and start to really move the needle on some of these initiatives that we need to get basically both sides of the coin met. So there's the enforcement piece, but then there's also the how do we help people move forward in their lives. And so I'm pretty happy with some of the conversations we're having right now and look forward to the next steps. But in the immediate time right now, there's a responsibility for you, and we will respond as best as we can and as fast as we can. And I think we'll be proven to do that. And, those are those interim steps that we've had to take and will continue to take. But there's the long-term measures, which is about how do we really, really help people, as well as how we help our economy as well. So 2 significantly different problems. We want to make sure we're looking after both.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was a great answer. Okay, so our next question is directed both to Bob Deeth, MLA, and Mayor Mike Morden. will there be regulated open for business hours for different business sectors from now on, provincially and or locally regulated? For example, businesses can only be open from 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. Bob, maybe we can hear from you first, as I know you have to hop on a call at 2 p.m.
Yes, thank you very much. First, if I could just, I forgot you'd actually asked a second question about supply chain in the last question, so I want to apologize, and if you just indulge me, I'll answer that a little bit. Just to remind everyone that in this state of public emergency that was declared by the Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General, there is there's some unprecedented steps that have been taken to secure critical supply chains and safeguard the most vulnerable during the crisis. There's actually a provincial supply chain coordination unit. So if you think of things like PPE, that's really important. And they've been working on that since the beginning of this crisis. And you'll remember in the press as well, you've heard prohibitions on the resale of essential goods and supplies. That has been slapped down very hard. And I think most people were very happy about that. As far as getting the supplies themselves, there's actually a number of private sector initiatives that are helping business. And one of those is the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. And they actually have a Facebook group to connect Canadian businesses owners to buy and sell PPE, for example, and supplies. I will send that link. And yeah, and the second part of the question is in regards to operating hours. And the province will not be regulating operating hours for businesses. It won't be different than before. I mean, of course, the only exception of that was a dedicated time for seniors and immune-compromised individuals. Now, keep in mind that that wasn't mandated. It was a request for flexibility for seniors and most vulnerable. And of course, we saw Meridian Meat Market, Save on Foods, and other leaders within Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows take the charge on that, and it was very helpful. So even though hours may not have changed dramatically for businesses, you're going to have to really think carefully about operating hours, and I'm sure Mike will have something in regards to that. And just, this is so important, and I think Lisa spoke to this as well, but we're not unfortunately returning to normal. It's the new normal, as Dr. Bonnie Henry has said. And so business owners will have to take the necessary time to really think about how to reopen safely. And that is what this is all about with WorkSafe BC and the Public Health Authority and industry stakeholders. Everyone's been working very closely together, actually been working with Minister Bear on the creative industry side, for example. Every sector is looking at best practices right now. So we'd ask everyone on the call to have a bit of patience, because this is fluid. It's ever changing, as we know, every day, and more specific information and guidelines will be coming. So thank you.
Excellent. And Mr. Morden?
I think that Bob's covered that pretty well. We don't get into regulating business hours other than what's currently in business bylaws. And I think, you know, has been mentioned, this is a common sense approach, but make sure you stay within the regulations. So social distancing is important. We follow and support all the orders of Dr. Henry, and those are there to keep us healthy and safe. There's the key to it. We want to facilitate everything that we possibly can to ensure people can go back to work, can go back to business, and yet stay healthy and safety. All right, I guess it's been long already. So you know what? There are concerns that I've heard, and maybe Fraser Health, but more probably WCB. You know, are there going to be any barriers to people opening their businesses immediately? Do they have to go and get some approvals right now? Or can they open as long as they're following these guidelines that you've put out there, which are quite clearly posted, but they are evolving. And so, you know.
We do have questions specifically regarding that just a little bit later, but yeah, it's a very, very valid point for sure.
Okay, well, that's what the community needs to hear about, right? The business community.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So again, into a bit more specifics, let's talk restaurants. We've heard from quite a few. So my restaurant will likely only be able to accommodate 50% capacity in order to safely social distance my guests. So specifically spacing those people out. Can I put tables and chairs on the sidewalk in front of my restaurant? This is like an impromptu patio. Or can I build a patio in my parking lot? So I'm not sure if maybe bylaws or economic development could speak to that specifically.
Hi there. I'll take the first bit and then I'll pass it over to to Chad. He'll talk specifically about the tables and chairs on the sidewalk component. So I'm happy to talk about, can I build a patio on my parking lot, because I mean everybody loves patios. I mean they create so much vibrancy around the community, and you know, and we actively want to try and support patios wherever we can, but every business is different, every location is different for that. You know, we're all going to be having staycations for a little while, and you know, when we sit on these patios we can dream we're in some part of Europe somewhere, and you know, and think about what might be in the future. But as a business owner, I would just say to the audience that if you have that vision to create a patio or a deck at your business location, and you really think that that might work for where you're situated, I would really encourage you to reach out to us, because we understand there's limited occupancy and that's for the foreseeable future. And a lot of restaurants are looking at this as a way to maybe accommodating more people. So in the first instance, I would say reach out to economic development. One of my staff is on the call and they will post some contact information in the chat line for you. Our job is to really pull together what we call a pre-application meeting. So really what we want to do is get all the different city departments together on one meeting with the business owner and really talk about specifics on location, so they understand the processes that they might have to go through to make that vision a reality at their location. And from that meeting, they will have an idea of what the processes are, how much it's going to cost to apply for whatever permits might be necessary, and how long that process might take to go through. So we find those meetings work really well for our business community, and it puts everybody on the same page from the outset. And we've done this very successfully with a number of businesses already. And we have a craft brewery at the moment that's looking at creating a picnic area. So we're really excited. And of course, we want to encourage that to continue. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Chad to talk about the sidewalk question.
Thank you. Go ahead, Chad.
Thank you. And I concur with Wendy's statement, and I think it's an extremely valuable service provided by economic development to help guide business owners through these permitting processes that can be complicated on our end. And I think City of Maple Ridge has some excellent staff who help make those kind of things much easier. Because, for instance, in this situation of dining tables on a sidewalk, there may also require a highway and traffic permit. That's the bylaw that regulates sidewalk use. And we are, again, being very reasonable in looking at use, whether it's a table for passing takeout to the customer or whether it's a dining table. And these specific scenarios will require different permitting. Some will require liquor licensing, and others will require a consideration of your liability insurance that extends onto the properties that we're discussing. So there are processes in place, and luckily Wendy's team is excellent at guiding individuals through that process and business owners.
Awesome. That's great, you guys. Okay, in a restaurant, can plexiglass dividers be used on tables rather than making sure customers are 6 feet apart? Maybe we could have WorkSafe BC or Fraser Health jump in on that one.
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in first here. It's Chris here from WorkSafe BC. You know, again, from the perspective of, I've kind of come back to this a couple times, but that hierarchy of controls, if there's an opportunity to be able to put in control measures that work within your setting as an employer that are going to maintain or allow for the protection of your workers. And again, I have to look at this from the perspective of the worker safety. Plexiglass at the tables will definitely act as an engineering control, which again has a very high level of protection to it or effectiveness to it. So it could absolutely be used, but it would be dependent on the setting and how that's going to work. So you still need to take into account if you have that plexiglass in place, how that's going to potentially impact other things within the workplace, safety for your workers when they are providing the dishes to the food to the patrons, how they're getting around the plexiglass, whether or not that plexiglass is stable. So there's a lot of other factors or other risks that could be introduced by going that route. But if you are able to consider those risks, both to the workers and to the public, then it's not to say that something like that could not be used as a control measure for protection.
Great, that's fantastic. Okay, moving on to hair salons, barbers, spas, and medical spas. This one hits close to home as I have one eyelash extension left and I'm slowly growing a little mullet. So what sort of steps are we supposed to take to reopen barbershops, salons, and spas? What sort of services will we not be able to provide? Maybe, Chris, maybe I'll direct this to you from WorkSafe BC to start.
Yeah, so thanks. I think one thing, and a number of other folks have talked about this as well in terms of the protocols and the guidelines on what's being put in place and what we've been developing, what WorkSafe BC has been developing over the last number of weeks. And it's been mostly my team and others in prevention services that have taken this on. The approach we're taking here is trying to provide as much guideline as we can to the employer, and I think it was Lisa that spoke to this a little bit earlier, that it is really going to be up to the employer to then take those guidelines that we are putting in place and applying that to the specific environment that that employer is working in. So we, from our perspective at WorkSafe BC, we will not be telling an employer that they can or can't do one of the tasks within, or one of the services, offer one of the services that they have within their nail salon or their barbershop or their hair salon. It's really going to be about whether or not that employer can implement control measures that meet the guidelines and the requirements that are being set out and still allow them to provide that service. So that's really what it comes down to. And in terms of WorkSafe BC's role in this and the guidelines that we've produced, our intent is to have everything up on our website by tomorrow morning, in time for employers to be able to take a look at those guidelines and start putting consideration into them. The other thing I want to mention, and I want to mention this now because Mayor Morden brought it up, and I do have to leave, unfortunately, at 2 o'clock here, is that it is not a requirement for employers to send their plans to WorkSafe BC and have them approved by WorkSafe BC before you can open your doors. You do not need to do that. It is a requirement, it is an expectation that employers are developing a plan. And if one of our officers who are out there doing inspections, if they come by and start asking you as the employer what you have put in place, there is an expectation that you will be able to produce that plan and show that plan to an officer and demonstrate that you have considered the risks and considered the control measures that need to be put in place to do that. But you do not need to get approval from us, from WorkSafe BC, prior to being able to open your doors.
Okay, that's really great. So again, Chris, you are the king of segues, I swear. So the final sort of questions, and they are big ones, are about businesses who are curious about the process of reopening, whether they were ordered shut or not. I think the reality is that our local business owners, they want to open safely because they want to protect their community and they want to protect their staff. So I mean, yeah, that was a major question. Do business owners have to develop their own plan for safely reopening within their specific business sector? And you sort of address that. And do they have to apply to any level of like city or province for approval before reopening? And I hear you say that it's not necessarily WorkSafe BC who's gonna give that approval, but I'm wondering if maybe we have somebody from Fraser Health or the city who could specifically address if there are any levels of approval, or if business owners just build their plan and then open when they are ready, and be prepared if there is someone who's checking on compliance to be able to show their measures. So maybe I'll go to Fraser Health for that one to start.
Sure, definitely. Yeah, so premises currently under order, the provincial health order, are the personal service establishments. So things like your bars, your pubs, and then your restaurants, which are restricted to takeout or delivery. And they will need the provincial health officer to amend or rescind the order before they can open to provide dine-in service. And then in the Fraser Health region, the indoor gyms and fitness facilities are currently under the Chief Medical Health Officer order, and that goes until May 31st. So that will also need the order to be either rescinded or amended before they can reopen. Now that ice rinks are not included in that, but with those, that being said, Fraser Health is receiving a number of requests to review and provide guidelines on appropriate recovery plans. There is no requirement to come to Fraser Health, and actually we would say that as a health authority, we don't have capacity to review all of these plans. As you can imagine, we are very busy dealing with cases of COVID within the hospitals, and then contact tracing within the public health units. And so as a health authority, we're happy to provide interpretation for any health aspects, but we are not in the position to review or approve requests. So if anyone requires any interpretation of the health aspects of the provincial guidelines when they're released in mid-May, then that would be an opportunity to contact Fraser Health for further assistance.
Great. Okay. And then this was another question that I think you guys have sort of touched on already, but I will ask it because I promised the business owners that I would ask the questions that they submitted. Will I have to pass some sort of a safety test through local bylaw or economic development department? Maybe Wendy, if you could jump in on that one, or if it's best for bylaws.
I think the safety test, I'll defer to bylaws on that.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you. So we are also not pre-approving safety plans, but we are responding to complaints largely from customers who, for whatever reasons, may not feel safe with the regulations put in place by the specific business. And then we will investigate and work with business owners to try and become compliant with provincial health orders, and just work together to support the reopening. So largely we're being reactive in this situation, and we've found excellent cooperation from business owners up to this point, who we all want to get to the same end goal in this case.
Absolutely.
Karen, no, there will not be requirements to pass a test to reopen. There's, as Brianna said, a very select number of businesses that were actually physically shut down through order, that being the personal services, the restaurant industry, for example, and the gyms on the health side. And so those will have to be lifted, but other businesses, the bookstore down the street can reopen. They just have to be ensuring that they're following the current guidelines, which are out there from the public health officer, being the social distancing, the 6 meters, the increased hand hygiene, the increased cleaning, and those pieces, the existing orders that are out there. The new guidelines will be out, imminently, as I said, that businesses can follow, but businesses are free to reopen. They don't have to pass tests. Only the sectors that were actually physically closed, which are only the 3 sectors that we mentioned, will have to have a special look at, and all 3 of those sectors have their plans in already to the health officer and through health, and are being reviewed. Earlier there was a question about my restaurant and the panel and all of that. There's already the Canadian Restaurant Association has already completed a guideline that is out there and available. You can find that online. The BC restaurant and hospitality industry I've been working with They've created their guidelines, sector specific to BC. That's being reviewed. The Beauty Council has been working with health, feeding recommendations up to the provincial health officers on the personal services side, and the gyms are working with the health, individual health authorities. And so all those pieces are physically being worked on, but every other business, if you're following safety measures that are currently exist, you are free to open. You don't have to pass tests, and you'll have clearer guidelines in the next few days.
That's incredible clarity. Thank you for that. Thank you for jumping in with that. That's fantastic. Okay, Inika, I'm going to throw to you. Do you have anything else to add from the perspective from the Downtown Maple Ridge BIA's sort of lens?
Yeah, really short. I just want to thank everybody for your down-to-earth questions, first of all, and then our panel members. We are so thankful for your to-the-point answers and to all those questions, and also everybody helping on the chat line, answering questions. Everything went so well. So we were only able to answer questions to a point, and we know that guidelines are coming out and you just need to follow all that. But the Downtown Maple Ridge Business Improvement Association, and I think I also speak for the chamber serving Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows, our intention was to facilitate this town hall meeting, created an opportunity for the businesses to connect directly with the experts and how to restart your business. So during the last couple of months, we really experienced firsthand that individual small businesses are having a hard time to trying to figure out, because there's such an overload on information being posted. What is it actually that is required and what is just recommended? And in their particular business and in their individual circumstances. So they just want to be open to reopen again. And business owners, of course, are deeply concerned about the well-being and the safety of their staff, their customers, and themselves when it comes to recommended or mandatory requirements. So I think many business owners are going to need individual assurances specific to our communities and their particular concerns. Businesses will be looking for local, accessible resources for their answers. I think this town hall hopefully opens some doors and shown access to different resources. But there's still a question that I have. Will these organizations that we saw today, will they make sure that there is something like a helpline, like a daily question and answer release, FAQ postings, or some other forms to answer those local questions? I think quick and accessible assistance for specifically the small businesses when they need it will be key moving forward. So both BIA and Chamber would be happy to communicate, facilitate any other opportunities, and share any helpful resources or new information to our businesses. In the end, we are all in this together, and to quote our dear Dr. Bonnie once again, let's be kind, let's be calm, and let's be safe. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Inika. So I hope that this session provided a bit more clarity for our local businesses as you all try and navigate the restart of our local economy. There is no roadmap, and there's certainly not an instruction manual, but our province and our city and our associations are here for you. They were here for you today. We know that the health and the well-being of our communities is paramount. And needless to say, our world looks way different than it used to. But in times when people need each other most, humanity has shown that its best side by continuing to show up for one another. I believe that our community of Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows has an opportunity to emerge from this stronger than ever. So a recording of this video will be made available shortly. And let's collaborate offline with all of the panelists, and we'll sort of build a document that has all of those links and those websites that have been shared, so you have one place to go and click and learn more information. I want to thank each of the businesses that submitted questions and took time out of your day to participate in this. to our panelists for your thoughtful and specific answers. I know that they were really specific, so thank you for that. I would also like to thank the Downtown Maple Ridge BIA and the Ridge Meadows Chamber of Commerce for collaborating on this town hall. This is so valuable to your members. And that concludes this session. Thank you very much for participating.